It's 6:30. Let's go through the papers now. We're joined in the studio by journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani and columnist and commentator Andre Walker. Very good morning to both of you. Let's start with this fallout. So we get the policy from Priti Patel, the new idea about sending people to Rwanda, and then Justin Welby uses his Easter message to slam it. He calls it ungodly, and now he's being criticised.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Justin Welby's a great bloke, particularly because he's pledged that he's going to allow asylum seekers to live in his £27 million library in his official residence. Oh, sorry, he actually hasn't done that, nor has he surrendered his tax-exempt status. It's amazing to see these people take to the TV, slag off the taxpayers for not supporting asylum seekers when they themselves have a tax-exempt status. But anyway, look, this guy's presiding over a failing institution. Nobody goes to his church anymore. All of the bishops are picked by the government, which I think is part of the Church of England's problem. I'm a Catholic. We don't go in for any of that sort of thing. But look, Priti Patel has said that he should come up with a better idea. Well, as I say, I've come up with two. He could let people move into his £27 million personal library, and he could get rid of his tax-exempt status. Those are two things that I believe that Welby could do. He's not going to do either of them, though, is he? And actually, there's something I think very serious about this. Easter Sunday is supposed to be the most important day in the Christian calendar. It's supposed to be more important than Christmas Day, and in fact it was used for a political platform, and I think that just shows just how lost the Church of England has got. And the final point I'd make is this.
I just wonder, is this story about the Church of England or about the views that he gave?
Well, I think if you are the official state religion of a country and you can't manage to be the most popular religion in that country, then you've got a significant problem with your own management of it. But look, these guys are just people who love getting involved in politics and whatever. I'll tell you something. Do you know, I don't know if viewers are in this position, but I've been over the channel on a ferry when it gets really, really choppy. And I will tell you, it's one of the most dangerous sea lanes in the world. The idea that we're going to continue to allow people to go on dinghies crossing when it's incredibly dangerous. We don't know how many people were killed in the Mediterranean because the people smugglers, to allow that to continue over the channel just to make yourself feel better as a religious leader, I think is really pretty despicable.
What the Archbishop of York has said is there a strategy instead that would attack then instead the people smugglers rather than the people being smuggled?
Yeah, well, but the point is, we are the people smugglers. I mean, if you look at Libya, what happens is the so-called people smugglers get the guys, 10, 15 miles off the coast, and we as European navies do the rest of the work. It's the Royal Navy that's escorting people across the channel. You know, the reality is we have not got a system, but what we've done, and, you know, I've spent a lot of time in Ukraine recently, what we've done is we've mixed up two things fundamentally. People in Ukraine do not want to move to Britain permanently. They want to go back to Ukraine. What we've done is we've forgotten that genuine refugees actually just want to seek safe sanctuary in the nearest country and then go back as soon as possible. Most of the people that we've got over are economic migrants. Nothing wrong with that, but they need to be processed as economic migrants.
Yeah, although I would say the war in Syria has been going on for some time, and that doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. Syria is one of the places where a lot of these people come from.
Yeah, I get that, but, you know, funnily enough, I've also spent a fair amount of time in Kosovo. If you look at the fight between the Serb army and the KLA, principally people wanted to go to Albania simply because that's where they could speak the language and whatever. When I was on the Ukrainian-Polish border, and I have to say to you, you had these young women whose husbands had all been conscripted to fight with young children. They really wanted to be in Poland. And you know, with all of this immigration, you know, you have to cite and you have to make a word of caution on all of this. You know, Krakow needs 30 new primary schools to be built from scratch by September, and we're worrying about moving everybody to the United Kingdom. It's just a fallacy.
Nabila, listening to this, what part of that analysis, if any, do you have sort of sympathy with?
Well, the Daily Mail goes on about this story as well, and he actually reports on ministers rounding on the Archbishop of Canterbury, whom they accuse of using a politicised Easter sermon to criticise the Rwanda plan. Now, is it the job of a spiritual leader to be seen as a political, conveying political messages? I should think so. I think we expect our spiritual leaders to moralise effectively, and that's exactly what he's done yesterday. He gave a moral and ethical point of view on how we should be treating refugees and migrants and humanity in general, and a lot of people thought that was commendable. You know, obviously the Archbishop of Canterbury is by definition an establishment figure, so he's not expected to come up with an anti-establishment view, but he's not the only one to criticise the Rwanda plan. There's a whole host of opposition politicians, including human rights organisations and charities, who have condemned the plan, including conservative politicians who are asking how the British government is going to safeguard human rights in all this.
But Priti Patel's point is, what's your plan?
Well, he's not a politician, but he can have an opinion. And I think they are very competent people. It's not the first time we're dealing with migration. I mean, it's the history of humanity movement of people. And there were specific examples in the past. I mean, Australia tried this and it didn't work out. So it begs the question as why we even...
It reduced the total number of deaths to 0 of people coming into the country. But look, here's my question to Justin Welby and indeed everybody else. Right, we get that Justin Welby is probably a Labour voter. We get that he is supportive of the opposition. We get that he believes in uncontrolled immigration.
Your analysis is
look, he's not going to come on GB News starting to say that he wants tough immigration curbs, is he? So I say that that's uncontrolled immigration. But what makes that ungodly? What is it about Rwanda that's ungodly?
Because he's saying you're subcontracting out your responsibility. You're not even having the process. Putting the process in Rwanda to review asylum. He's saying that the responsibility has been subcontracted out to Rwanda.
I mean, where you do the processing, I mean, I don't know if it matters, but the reality is, I've seen so many people just effectively slate Rwanda. I mean, we go on about how we shouldn't be talking down African countries.
To be fair,
we go on about the way that we, you know, sometimes we can be racist against black countries.
No, but it's not the most stable.
It is not ungodly.
The most safe country.
Rwanda is now top of the league in Africa for cutting red tape. It's now got one of the world's leading airlines in Rwanda. It wants to follow on from Dubai and make itself the Dubai
human
of Africa.
Rights track record?
Well, yes, but look, I mean, the ethnic violence that took place in Rwanda is a significant amount of time ago now. And let's remember, we live in a country, the United Kingdom, that had significant human rights problems in Northern Ireland.
Do you think it's a policy that's actually going to work?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, because of the very simple premise at the bottom of all this. We have got confused in between economic migration and refugee status.
When you say who's got confused?
Well, I think the whole country, haven't we? Because what we see time and time again is people who want to move to Britain to get a better life, claiming that they're in danger, and it's simply not true. Now, look, as far as I'm concerned, if I was about to be a victim of genocide, say, in Ukraine, and somebody offered me to spend some time in Rwanda, I'd be perfectly happy. If, however, what I want to do is move to the United Kingdom to get a better job and earn more money, I'd be furious about going to Rwanda, and that's the very point.
Yeah, no, I'll take that point. But the Permanent Secretary to the Home Office, Matthew Rycroft, has said that the policy had a high cost and would only be value for money if it did reduce the number of channel crossings, and there's no guarantee. So this is a long shot. Well, admittedly, maybe the only shot, but a long shot.
Well, look, Priti Patel, I don't think has been particularly great in the Home Office, but there does have to be a process. And I mean, what we saw going on in the Mediterranean was an absolute horrendous disaster. But the reason that it kept happening was we were encouraging the people traffickers by allowing people to stay in the countries they arrived in. I will tell you, we will create a humanitarian crisis, which, by the way, will be ungodly, genuinely ungodly, if we continue to allow the crossing of the channel on dinghies.
Priti Patel says come up with a better plan. Well, morning to Deborah, who says we must sort all of this out with France. What is wrong with the French? They must take some responsibility. If you've got a different plan, let us know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let's move on and look at the front page of the Daily Telegraph. Johnson accused of instigating a drinks party. An 18-day parliamentary recess comes to an end tomorrow. It's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride for Boris Johnson.
Well, and rightly so. I mean, I've said this multiple times on GB News, but we've never met before, so I'll say it again. My mother died of lung cancer during the coronavirus lockdown, and at the same time as her niece and nephews were unable to visit her in hospital, the people making the rule were getting thoroughly wellied in Downing Street. I don't think that is an appropriate situation. And what really annoys me more than anything else is the way that we continually have heard from people in Downing Street saying, we believed it was legal. No, no, no. You believed you would get away with it on a technicality. So effectively, whilst you're refusing Loretta Walker's relatives to go and visit her on a deathbed, you are at the same time trying to find ways to wriggle out of the rules that you yourself brought in. I think it's disgraceful, but it has to be said. I've got a funny feeling about this, and my feeling is, you look at the Sturgeons of this world, you look at the Keir Starmers of this world, these people loved the lockdown, and they would have had it for far, far longer. The stupid thing about this country at the moment is that we are led by an absolute hypocrite, but at least he's a hypocrite rather than a genuine believer in this nonsense policy.
Yeah.
Nabila, has he wriggled out of it?
I don't think so. I think he'll have to come up with a very clear narrative about what's actually happened, because he keeps changing the goalposts. That, you know, sometimes first start. Now there's no discussion about whether it happened or not. I mean, there happened to be a photographer on the spot as well, so there's no dispute about the breaching of the rules per se. But we keep hearing conflicting stories from him, whether he actually attended those parties or whether he just happened to be there. They were parties, or indeed.
Well, he says, I didn't know I was breaking the rules. That's what he said in that statement last week. I didn't know. I'm sorry, I was fine, but I didn't know I was breaking the rules. Well,
I mean, recollections may vary, as the Queen would say, but I think he will. Will it lead to his resignation in the long terms? I don't think so. I think.
But should it?
To be fair, I think, these issues shouldn't be brushed under the carpet. He will have to come up with a strong and sincere explanation of what's happened, because there have simply been too many people who have died and suffered in so many ways from lockdowns. And I think people at the very least would expect some amend to be made.
If he makes that explanation, will you believe whatever he says?
Well, would anybody believe politicians in general? I think that's But
it's particularly Boris Johnson, isn't it? Because the narrative is, as you mentioned, with how he spent lockdown, has changed, and then a little bit more evidence comes out, and we get a slightly different version of the story each time.
Well, the point about Boris Johnson is he always managed to wriggle out of situations. But is there anybody waiting in the wings to take over if he was to, leave? Or I don't think so.
Andre, do you think he should go?
No, I don't, simply because of the issue of him being a hypocrite rather than a true believer. But then again, if we look right across the United Kingdom, and on GB News, by the way, we like talking about every part of the country. You look at Nicola Sturgeon, accidentally walked into a shop yesterday without a mask on. She's broken the rules a couple of times. You look at Michelle
Is
O'Neill.
that a fair comparison?
No, not really.
It's not drinking alcohol.
No, I understand that, but if you go round to a lot of these leaders, particularly the ones who are most sellers, none of them are white and white. I mean, OK, Mark Drakeford in Wales never broke the rules, but on the very day he was arguing for social distancing to be brought in as law, he was doing his Diwali dance with about 20 people. Michelle O'Neill, because let's not forget our friends in Northern Ireland, the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland, attended the funeral of somebody from the IRA Army Council, 2,000 people not wearing a mask. Blatantly illegal. Her argument, by the way, was that she'll only listen to the Irish police and they weren't present.
So are you basically saying it was impossible to keep the rules? So let's not criticise people for breaking them.
No, I'm saying that our leaders didn't believe in it. There's a rival to GB News that has a presenter, I'm not going to say the name, has a presenter who has been taking to the airwaves, slagging everybody off for not wearing a mask, who hosted a birthday party illegally during the lockdown. I mean, look, the level of hypocrisy from people is absolutely dire. 2,000 people, 3,000 people at a funeral, and you are the Deputy First Minister of a country that's literally saying that should be a crime.
Andre, thank you very much.
Yep.
Andre Walker and Nabila Ramdani. They'll be joining us again in about an hour's time to go through some more stories in the papers. Good morning to Kevin, Steve, David. We'll get to your emails shortly. You can join the conversation as well. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
It is 7:35. Time to go through the papers this morning with journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani and columnist and commentator Andre Walker. Very good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Let's start with Andre then. Andre, you want to talk about the world economic recovery from stagflation?
Fascinating stuff at this time of the morning. Well, but it is an incredibly serious issue. Look, I genuinely think that the Western world is effectively self-aborting. The way that we are deliberately destroying our society, the way that we had this crazy lockdown, destroyed the economy. You know, we had Rishi Sunak, that eat out to help out. You might as well have just incinerated a couple of billion quid. It was a complete waste of money. Well, now, of course, we've got this problem in Ukraine, and it's a humanitarian disaster, and it's terrible for the people who are trapped in Mariupol. But actually, there's a knock-on effect right across the world, because not only do we have a lack of growth as a result of all of these economic shocks, but we also have inflation as well. I hate the word stagflation, but it is an incredibly serious problem. People are getting poorer and poorer and poorer. And of course, we've got all these crazy ideas like this net zero carbon, which has plunged people into poverty. And then, of course, we have all these problems in Ukraine as well. And some of the statistics, by the way, of the knock-on effect of Ukraine is unbelievable. I don't know if you know that cooking oil is now 3 times what it used to cost, I think, about 2 months ago. Now, when you put that, of course, cooking oil is not a major problem for most people, but when you take the totality of all these agricultural products that previously came from Ukraine, we do have a significant problem here. And I think that when you have such damaging policies as the lockdowns have been in Britain, and these damaging policies on the loony green agenda, actually you are causing significant problems for
So
people.
This is the situation that we've inherited now. Any solutions?
Well, we could win. Look, I think genuinely what we have to do in Britain, of course, is to bonfire all of those EU regulations which have weighed down business so badly. We're doing pretty well in terms of negotiations on free trade deals. But of course, the problem that we have, well, we have a huge opportunity, don't we? Because Brexit is not a thing in of itself. It gives you an ability to do something. But what we've not done yet is got rid of all these crazy regulations that the EU brought in. If we do that, we can make our businesses far more competitive and start trading around the world. Also, I have to say to you, you know, we are the architects of our own destiny with all of these mad green policies. I mean, one of my favourites was when we shut down all of our steel plants on the grounds that we taxed them to death with green taxes and just moved them to more polluting plants in China just to make ourselves feel better. You know, the #1 export from the port of Southampton is rubbish. I mean, if you think about that, it's unbelievable.
Do you know the show I'd like to watch? I think it'd be Andre here and Extinction Rebellion on the other side, and we could just leave. Oh, I don't think we'd need to be in the studio anymore.
That would be a great discussion. That would be a great discussion.
Let's move on to something else, because Paul's actually going to be headed to France later on this week, because of course the French go to the polls. Paul's getting a little bit hairy, Mr. Macron. We have here in the Mail a very smiling, I have to say, looking quite handsome, Mr. Macron, with a lot of buttons that have been undone. If you're listening on the radio, Macron's sort of laid back on this mustard sofa, but he's got a white shirt on that's open, I would say, to below the, what would you describe this bit? The sternum, I'm being told. And there's a very hairy chest.
It's the Simon Cowellization of politics.
It is, really. He's doing a lot of man-spreading there, a lot of buttons. Nabila, what do you make of this as a French
this is
woman yourself?
Emmanuel Macron as we've never seen him before, it has to be said. I mean, look, this is election week. The French are going to the polls next Sunday to decide whether he stays in power or whether they put Marine Le Pen, the far-right candidate, in power. So he's hoping to win a second term, and he's resorting to a rather unusual vote-winning strategy. I mean, the Mail said that he's showing a glimpse of his decidedly luxuriant chest hair in order to help him win.
He's flirting.
That is deliberate. Right, that's not an
absolutely.
accident.
He's got a photographer, a female photographer, who follows him on his campaign trail, and he's been posting rather moody pictures of him as a poser. We've seen him in his Zelensky gear during the conflict, wearing a hoodie.
And men with cheveux on their chest, is that quite a big thing in France?
Well, I have to say, I've interviewed him a number of times, and I was convinced he was the clear-cut boy next door. But looking at this picture, it looks like he's got, chest hair that's got a life of its own. And
I mean,
I hope it's not a wig.
Oh, gosh. He does have to go on a bit of a charm offensive, because this time a week ago, there was real concern. Those polls had got really tight.
Yes, I mean, he's a modern politician. He wants to win an election. He wants to be the first president in 20 years to win a second term in office. And he's obsessed by image, like all modern politicians. So he's no exception to that rule. He's still very young, especially for a French politician. He's 44 years old. He clearly wants the world, and indeed voters in France, to know it. I just hope that his mum and indeed his wife's approve.
Yeah, and the polls in France with Le Pen, they have widened a little bit like his shirt.
Yes, indeed.
Well done.
I mean, it's a hotly contested...
Andre liked that, didn't you?
I missed Paul's dry humour. Shall we move on to the Times?
I'm so glad you've not made me comment on his hairy chest.
Oh, what do you have?
Please, what do you? Yeah, I mean, what do you make of it?
Let me tell you, I've got a terrible problem, because I mean, the only bit of me that's not hairy is the top of my head at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, I started.
That was too much information.
I started at the back with some wings, and then it just sort of took over.
Let's talk about...
You know what it's like, don't you?
Well, yeah, I'm struggling to get anywhere near that. I don't know how. I've just got a few
I love the way we've offended all the women with this. It's great. We can keep doing this all day.
If you're listening on the radio, you're getting a much better experience, I can promise you that. Yeah.
Let's talk about Boris Johnson. Page 2 of the Times. They've looked at some research. There's 4 in 5 believe Boris Johnson is out of touch on the inflation crisis. Is he?
Yeah, and actually, you know, I'm thinking about this. Maybe I should have put this together with the FT, because I just think that they're absolutely the same thing in terms of politicians just not understanding the position that ordinary people are in. You know, I was up north at the weekend, and by the way, the number of people that are watching GB News in Manchester is just astonishing. I got stopped in the street everywhere, but I was in a little place called Goulburn in Asda, in Goulburn. There was a woman there who was telling me that she had 3 jobs and she still couldn't pay the bills. And you just look at the level of cost that people are suffering from at the moment, and you get the impression, you know, oh, we've created X number of jobs. Yeah, but, you know, people have got 4 of them and they still can't pay the mortgage. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Yeah, so should the government do more? Like, I know you've talked about getting rid of EU regulations. That takes time. Yes. Immediately, what should the government do?
The first and most important thing is the government needs to recognise a couple of things. First of all, the number one issue right now is not Ukraine, it's not Brexit, it's not immigration, it's the cost of living crisis, and it is a crisis. And the reality is, I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day who lived in Windsor, you know, family with a £70,000 income, but because the cost of housing going through the roof, they're actually comparatively poor. 70 grand income and you're comparatively poor. Obviously, it's worse in other parts of the country. We've got to start saying to ourselves, this is the number one issue. You know, look, I think Keir Starmer is a truly, truly terrible Labour politician. You know, he absolutely hates his own voters over the issue of Brexit, and yet he might beat Boris Johnson. Why might he beat Boris Johnson? Because of the fact the public are right. I mean, only 4 out of 5 believe that Boris Johnson is out of touch in inflation. I mean, I'd have thought it would have been 100%.
Yeah.
But there you go, he's doing all right.
Just very quickly, Nabila, what do you think the government should be doing, if indeed it can do anything more to reduce the cost of living? Which is a big issue in the French election as well.
Well, it is a huge issue, and as Andre was quite really saying, this is one of the after effects of, dare I say, the war in Ukraine. We're feeling it through, we're trying to put an awful lot of pressure on Putin to try and stop this bloody conflict by putting an awful lot of sanctions on Russia. But as we are realising, those sanctions have an effect on us as well. So, it's quite tricky, but that something drastic has to be done. I don't know if it takes more spending or cutting taxes. I mean, Chancellor has to work it out, I suppose.
Yeah.
Nabila, Andre, thank you very much. Back in the studio with us about an hour's time to bring you some more stories. Well, let's go through the papers. Joining us in the studio is journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani and columnist and commentator Andre Walker. Let's start, shall we, with what's happening in Ukraine. We were hearing about it a little bit earlier on the programme, particularly, Nabila, the situation in Mariupol, the city there. And what seems to be very clear is that the defenders are just saying, we will not budge.
Yes, indeed. This is a harrowing dispatch, actually, in the Eye today from Mariupol, the city that hasn't fallen, or maybe yet, and Ukrainian forces vowing to fight till the end. And this is despite the ultimatum that Vladimir Putin issued to Ukrainian forces. The Kremlin had given Mariupol's last defenders until 10 a.m. yesterday to lay down their weapons and effectively give up. But as the deadline passed away, there is no indication of compliance or indeed from the Ukrainians to give up. And they say that they will continue the resistance. And I mean, this just gives an indication that the war has now reached a critical stage, hasn't it? We keep hearing that Mariupol is about to fall, and yet it's not falling quite yet. The Russians are clearly desperate for a significant breakthrough, and they would use a story like this as to use for propaganda, that they're almost there.
Yeah, and once they take Mariupol, that is effectively a route to Mykolaiv and then onwards to Odessa.
Yes, indeed. I mean, taking Mariupol in the state it is at the moment would be an absolutely devastated Mariupol, and you wonder why the Russians do that to, create so much death and disruption. There's a sense of pure nihilism about it all, and as you said, the expansion of the aggression carries on. There's an expected mass attack in the Donbass region as well, which looks very likely, and this takes us back right to 2014 when there was already fighting in the Donbass already. So you do get the impression of a stalemate war, where you've got areas that are lost as quickly as they're won almost. And I reckon that Putin is hoping for a quick victory in time for his celebration of Victory Day in the Great Patriotic War on May the 9th. And this should really make us start to worry about the possibility of Putin using nuclear weapons, in fact.
Yeah, what's your feeling, Andre? Is he going to have his victory by May the 9th, do you think, or is it going to drag out?
Well, I've got a system at home which is a bit obscure, but I can watch pretty much every TV channel in the world on it. And I've been watching I don't speak Russian, but I've been watching Russian and Belarusian TV, and it was really astonishing. I think last Saturday, every single Belarusian channel had a programme about the Belarus genocide during the Second World War, effectively trying to link Ukraine to that. The message going out in Russia is that there are significant food shortages in Britain caused by the sanctions, and that the ruble has bounced back, so Vladimir Putin is effectively winning the economic war. Now, if that's not pushing Belarus towards war and telling the Russians that they're winning, I don't know what is. I'm extremely concerned about all this because, look, we already saw the battle plans leaked accidentally by the Belarusians that showed an invasion of Moldova. Less likely now, given that the Russians have had a hiding. But what upsets me more than anything else, and we've got to say this, Vladimir Putin is what the Americans call a chicken hawk. This guy is hiding in the Kremlin with that big table because he's afraid of getting a virus off people, willing to send your kids into war, not willing to go anywhere near the battlefield himself. Hawkish with you, chicken himself. And I think his threats and his desperation make him look utterly pathetic. But the problem, of course, to go back to that TV system, they're not seeing it in Russia. They're not seeing it in Belarus. The message is not getting through.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Moldova, actually, because I know the Moldovans are very worried that they could be next, still, aren't they? They're a tiny country. They're not a member of EU. They're not a member of NATO. And if they do if the Russians do make advances towards Odessa, it's only, an hour from the border with Moldova, former Soviet state. They're worried that he could move on into Moldova.
Yes, and of course, what happens is if you take Moldova, you massively shorten the land border with NATO, because obviously there's the Caucasus Mountains there as well. If you take Moldova.
We're going to pause the papers right there. Andre and Nabila, we're back with you in a second, because we're joined now on Breakfast this morning on GB News by the Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth. It's Greg Hands. A very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme. The main topic we've been discussing is Priti Patel saying, if you don't like this plan, come up with another one. A former minister earlier, Norman Baker, said it made him not proud to be British. Are you proud of this plan?
Well, look, the point is, what is going to be effective and how are we going to deal with this problem? Last year, 28,500 people entered the country illegally across the Channel from France. 27 people died in that process. Clearly, the government has to take action. That is why we've done this agreement with Rwanda, two sovereign countries making this agreement, and we think it will be effective in deterring people from making that perilous journey and clamping down in particular on the people smugglers who are profiting too much from human misery in making that journey. That is the purpose of the policy.
We've been trying to establish this all morning, Minister. What are the legal routes for asylum seekers to apply to the UK, say if they're coming from a country like Iran?
Well, there's lots of different legal routes, and in fact the UK has given sanctuary to 185,000 people since 2015. That is a lot of people, 15,000 from Afghanistan, around about 97,000 I think from Hong Kong, and others. There's plenty of legal routes to apply to migrate to the UK. What we do want to take action on is illegal migration. The UK, we've got a good tradition of providing sanctuary to those fleeing conflict. What we don't want to have is illegal migration, particularly in the numbers that we've seen. As I say, 28,500 people last year. That compares to just 300 in 2018 making that cross-channel journey. 100 times increase. Inevitably, the government is taking action.
I mean, is it possible to be an illegal asylum seeker?
Is it possible to be an illegal asylum seeker? Well, if your asylum claim is turned down, then you wouldn't enter the UK. But here it's a question of relocating would-be migrants to Rwanda. It's a different kind of policy.
The only way you can apply for asylum is to arrive here legally. I mean, that's your legal right to claim for asylum, but you can only do it on British soil, so it's a kind of catch-22.
Well, look, we are confident that this scheme is legal. We're confident that through the different migration laws and immigration laws and police and borders bills that we have and acts that we have over recent years, that this scheme is legal. As I say, it's also a sovereign agreement between two sovereign countries, the UK and Rwanda.
Let's move on briefly if we can. You're going to announce some new laws designed to protect shoppers' money in saving clubs. Can you explain why they're needed and how they'll help?
Yeah, well, about 4% of people in this country take part in savings clubs. This is where you pay money into a company over the course of a year or a few years to save for an event that you know is coming up. It might be something like Christmas, it might be a family funeral, and we want to make sure that consumers' money is protected. There has been a voluntary code until now, but we will be putting it into legislation to make sure that those companies protect consumers' money. So somebody might remember the case of Fairpack, which went bust in 2006, leaving a lot of people stranded without their savings. This is to make sure that that never happens again.
I want to ask you very briefly, there's going to be a new GCSE focusing on saving the planet, a GCSE in natural history after demand for lessons on climate change. Do you think that younger generation are engineering a real significant shift towards climate policy?
Well, I think young people I've got two teenage children myself, are incredibly engaged on climate change. As you would expect and you'd want them to be. I think that's really, really good news. And I think what we can tell them in this country is the UK, we have made significant progress towards reducing our emissions. We're going to go net zero by 2050. We've reduced emissions in this country in the last 30 years by some 44%. So pretty good record, in fact the best record in the G7, but we need to go further, we need to go faster. So my message to young people watching is yes, the UK government is here on your side. We led the world at COP26 in bringing the world together to make sure the Glasgow Climate Compact builds on those international agreements. And the whole world delivers in terms of reducing emissions and gets to net zero. That is the purpose of our international climate change policy.
Talking about being on people's sides, are you on the Prime Minister's side this week? There are rumours of a vote of no confidence because of the Prime Minister's conduct re Partygate.
Well, I've heard nothing of that. What I do know is the Prime Minister will be appearing in the Commons He appears very often, actually, more than I think any other Prime Minister I can remember. I've served as an MP under 5 different Prime Ministers, and Boris Johnson appears more than any of them in the House of Commons later this week to answer questions from MPs, to explain what has happened, the fact that he has apologised, he's paid the fine, he's expressed regret at what has happened. But equally, I think he wants to outline how he's getting on with the job, and how the government is getting on with the job, and how the government is delivering for the people of this country, anything from the vaccination programme through to taking the tough action on Ukraine and sanctions on Russia, all of these things. I think he's looking forward. I'm sure he's relishing the chance to be back in the Commons explaining to MPs.
Has he told the truth?
Well, look, the Prime Minister, I'm sure, has never knowingly misled Parliament, and he will explain everything that's happened. I think that is what he said very clearly, to give him the chance to explain in the House of Commons to MPs what has happened. But I just stress again that he has apologised, he said that mistakes were made, he's paid the fine, but equally, let's hear it from Boris Johnson later this week.
Rumours this morning, though, that he instigated another party. If that's true, then how many more times can he say sorry?
Well, look, I think your question, if that's true, let's wait and see. The police is doing an investigation of these matters, and I wouldn't want to preempt that.
All right, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning, Minister. Appreciate your time. Thank you. It's Greg Hands there, who's the Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth.
Let's go back to our journalist in the studio with us, journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani, and also columnist who I can hear laughing already, Andre Walker. What did you make of that? Not a full-throttled support and defence there of Boris Johnson. It was a sort of wait and see.
No, and I'm a good friend of Greg Hands. As you know, I used to work at the House of Commons. I used to be a Conservative political advisor and press officer and all that sort of stuff. So I've known Greg for years, and I think he's a good guy. But the problem is, it's really hard to defend Boris Johnson. Now, whether he should disappear as Prime Minister, I don't know. But, you know, that I'm as shocked as you are that these parties took place. He literally went to them, right? And then the whole thing that really annoys me, and I don't know whether you guys agree and whether the viewers agree, but this whole concept, which was we thought we'd found a loophole, and we thought it was legal for that reason. They were having a party, but they believed that there was some way of, you know, subverting the law, a law they brought in. I think that whether it's legal or illegal, they should have acted within the spirit of a law they brought in. No, actually, I'm talking rubbish. They shouldn't have brought in that stupid law to start with, so I could have visited my mother when she was sick in hospital.
Nabila, Greg Hands said that Boris Johnson was going to relish the opportunity to be able to sort of speak to MPs and set the record straight. Is he looking forward to this, or do you think Boris Johnson should maybe be nervous?
Well, I think he will inevitably be nervous, because that's not the first time we're going to hear him trying to explain himself. And as you quite rightly asked, Paul, is it going to be the last time he says sorry? Is it going to be the last time he's have to pay a fine? For example, how many more fines will he be served with? I think there's a slightly disingenuous posture from the Prime Minister. I think it would be quite wrong to just try to shrug it off. I think there are very serious underlying issues. Andre has just mentioned the death of a relative. Lots more people in the country would have gone through those experiences, and also the loss of jobs and all sorts of suffering. So I don't think he can adopt his casual, aloof and indeed, carefree attitude. That would be out of order.
Yeah, I guess the fear at number 10 is if there are more fines for the Prime Minister, if he's found to have broken COVID rules further, then the defence of it was a mistake, I'm sorry, you can't keep saying that.
Yes, indeed. How many mistakes can he make? And, members of the public who were caught making those mistakes were punished in a very
may I just return to this point where he continually says, I believed it was legal. What he's saying is, I believed that I'd found a loophole because I live in my office, effectively. That's it. Not I was going with the spirit of the law, not I genuinely believed in the rules that were being brought in, not that I was going to do what everybody else was going to do, that I'd found a way of making myself a special special category. Now, it turned out to be wrong, but I think even the excuse is pathetic.
What about the defence? Let's let the defence that we need to move on from this. It was ages ago, and we've got to deal with bigger issues.
Paul, that's not the defence. The defence is Keir Starmer's even worse. You know, he just wants to lock down forever, and he really believed in this stuff. The argument in favour of Boris Johnson is he's a damn hypocrite rather than a believer in this stupidity.
Right.
I want to ask very quickly about one other story that we're supposed to look through in our paper review. Evolution is what we can blame. If you've had over the bank holiday any arguments with your in-laws, you can blame evolution.
By the way, that wasn't just because it was page 3 of The Sun, right? I'm not going to hold it up, right? But in fact, look, I'm hiding it under that.
Very well done.
Right, OK, so I love these ridiculous science stories that you get in newspapers. So apparently this one is that bickering with your mother-in-law is part of evolution because your mother-in-law is biologically programmed to favour her child over you. Now, I don't know whether that's groundbreaking scientific.
Yeah, who carried out that study? The University of Bleeding Obvious.
Yeah. That's right. I love that stuff. It's like that red wine will let you live for another 100 years.
Do they suggest any things that you could do to avoid arguments or no?
Well,
they've just said accept them if they happen.
I mean, I'll just make these up and pretend.
Okay.
Move to another country.
That's one.
Pay her off. Let her use your holiday home. None of these are in the paper. I'm just literally making these up.
Right, Andre, thank you very much for joining us, and Nabila as well. It's been great to have you this morning on Breakfast on GB News.